Talks between social movements of the Colombian city of Cali and the government this Thursday were suspended due to attacks by the security forces against the protesters who remained in the resistance movement mobilizes to defend Palestine. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. Talks between social movements of the Colombian city of Cali and the government this Thursday were suspended due to attacks by the security forces against protesters who remained in the streets while the meeting was taking place. Local media reported that minutes after the negotiations started, the protest organizers decided to abandon the talks after receiving information about an attack on fellow demonstrators who had mobilized in the city. The news sparked tensions in the Maria Isabel Urrutia Coliseum, where the talks were to be held, and the social movements denounced the lack of commitment on the part of the government to attend to their demands. For the moment, it is not known if the talks will be resumed. Cali has been the epicenter of the national demonstrations against the policies of the Iván Duque government since they broke out on April 28th. Also on Thursday, a massive popular assembly was held in the Colombian city of Cali, promoted by the National Strike Committee as part of the activities of the 16th day of mobilizations against the government of President Iván Duque. After another night of police repression, activists, social movements and organizations making up the National Strike Committee analyzed the evolution of the demonstrations in the country and evaluated the progress of their demands as issued on April 28th. The initiative comes after the failed talks between President Duque and the representatives of the Strike Committee on Monday due to the government's refusal to hear the population's demands. Despite this, the Strike Committee reiterated its willingness to negotiate with the government as long as the violence against demonstrators stops and a process is established to comply with the demands voiced in the mobilizations.
In this sense, we hope that this meeting will be very important to continue in this national strike dynamic, and, as the people have been expressing themselves in the streets, to resist is not to hold back. We are resisting in order to defend life. We are resisting in order to persevere, to build a new country for a dignified life, and, in this sense, we join those voices that say strike to advance. Long live the national strike, strength comrades, and let us continue with the national strike.
Meanwhile, activist Gloria Inés Ramirez, participating in the popular assembly, stated that the national strike is a way of calling of the world to acknowledge the reality in Colombia.
We are on the streets also in defense of life. More than 6,400 false positives, more than 1,000 leaders and social leaders and women murdered. But in addition to this, the massacres. More than 120 massacres have taken place in this country. It is time for the world to see and hear what is happening in Colombia.
Trade union leader Ruth Quevedo highlighted the solidarity with relatives of those killed in the protest, as well as the injured and missing due to the repression unleashed by the security forces on the orders of Iván Duque government.
We join this hearing in a call of solidarity for all of our compatriots who have been murdered, abused, for the more than 500 missing people who we do not know where they are. We do not have definite figures of the people who have appeared and those who are disappearing under strange circumstances. And we believe that this hearing is fundamental because it's the people on the streets who have expressed themselves, who are looking for spaces of representation, who are looking for scenarios like this one for dialogue, to listen.
And Colombia's Foreign Minister, Claudia Blum, has resigned as the country is immersed in one of the biggest social and political crises of recent years. The minister did not specify the reasons for her departure in the resignation letter submitted to President Iván Duque, but stated that the decision was irrevocable and effective immediately. Blum's resignation followed of Finance Minister Alberto Carrasquilla, who resigned earlier this month after the widespread protests against the tax reform proposed by Duque broke out. Local media and opposition parties said the foreign minister's resignation was inevitable, given the violence unleashed against protesters by security forces, acts that have been strongly condemned by the international community. In Ecuador, social movements and workers in the transport sector protested against the recent increase in fuel decreed by the government. Representatives of the transport section denounced that the government of Moreno has failed to comply with the process of dialogue with the guilds of the sector. Social movements also joined in the rejection of the measure that is part of the package of conditions requested by the International Monetary Fund to the government of Lenín Moreno. The increase of 44% to the price of fuels has effect after the band of prices approved by President Lenín Moreno in July of last year, which implies a progressive increase of the prices of fuel in the country based on international prices. The government of Cuba reported that the agricultural sector had loss of more than $300 million between April and December 2020 due to the United States economic blockade. The Ministry of Agriculture reported that the coercive measures of Washington affected the acquisition of raw materials and the national and international marketing of agricultural products. The governmental body also said that faced with the threat of sanctions imposed by the United States, it was difficult to position products such as charcoal, coffee, tobacco, and honey in the international market.
In order to have an idea, we have calculated in this period of time that we have an affection amounting to more than $330 million, and of that $330 million, just because of the losing of exports erasing, we are talking about $194.4 million.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on teleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, access and analysis of political, economic and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The world today. Mondays on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. In Chile, final preparations are underway for the elections to be held this May 15th and 16th. In this process, Chileans will elect the members of the Constitutional Convention, as well as regional and local authorities. Over 14 million voters are called to participate in these elections, where regional governors, mayors, and council members will be elected, as well as the 155 members of the Constitutional Convention, the body charged with drafting a new constitution to replace that which has been in place since the Pinochet dictatorship. It should be recalled that the historic move comes as a result of the widespread, massive mobilizations of Chileans from October 2019 onwards to demand fundamental changes in the country. There are more than 20,000 candidates standing in the polls. The elections, which were postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, are being held over 2 days in order to avoid crowding at polling stations.
This is a very important election, maybe the most important in several years, and studies show that this election will be very similar to the plebiscite of October 2020. That is, one of 2 Chileans is showing intentions to go to the polls. It might be 50 or 51% of electoral participation.
Regional bodies, and one, probably the most important, to select the 155 members of a convention in charge of drafting a new constitution. We have more details in the following report.
The Constitutional Convention is a direct result of the popular uprising of October 2019. For weeks, millions took to the streets demanding an end to the neoliberal scheme first imposed by the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet in the 1980s. A scheme further strengthened by the center-left governments in the 30 years elapsed since the end of Pinochet's regime in 1991. Achieving constitutional change cost at least 40 lives. Over 400 people sustained crippling eye injuries. Thousands were arbitrarily arrested and prosecuted under draconian laws of internal security. Many are still in jail. A few weeks into the uprising at its peak, closed-door meetings between Sebastián Piñera's government and political forces represented in parliament gave birth to a so-called agreement of peace. Only the Communist Party refused to join in, demanding a nationwide political dialogue instead. That did not happen, and the government survived. The agreement buried the main popular demand, a plenipotentiary constitutional assembly, imposing a convention instead with limited powers. A referendum held in October 2020 did not ask Chileans what kind of constitutional body they wanted, but how the convention's membership should be. Either 100% elected members or just 50%, with the other half to be filled by parliamentarians. The first option won 80% support, setting the scenario for this weekend's vote, when 150 convention members, 17 of them from indigenous peoples, will be picked by some 15 million potential voters. Potential because in Chile vote is not mandatory. On the bright side, this is the first time ever a constitution is to be written in Chile by freely elected representatives with over 3,000 candidates, most of them independent, and the first ever in the world to be split 50-50 between men and women.
The National Electoral Council of Venezuela called regional and municipal elections for November 21, 2021. The president of the National Electoral Council, Pedro Calzadilla, stressed that the call for electoral activity was unanimously approved by the Rectory of the Electoral Power. Calzadilla emphasized that the ruling of the electoral body is contemplated in the constitutional framework that emanates joint elections for governors, mayors, and legislators of legislative councils for this year 2021. The CNE's top authority indicated that the electoral campaign process will begin on October 28th and end on November 18th.
The election campaign will begin on 28 October and end on 18 November, on the eve of the election to be held on 21 November as announced.
Two Indian men detained by British immigration officials in Glasgow were released on Thursday after a 7-hour standoff between hundreds of protesters and Scottish police. Around 200 protesters were at the scene, with chants of "Leave our neighbours, let them go," and "Cops go home" being heard as a ring of police stood around the van. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon slammed the unacceptable action by Britain's Home Office to detain the two men, especially as it came during celebrations for the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Fitr in an area hit by the pandemic. On Thursday in Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps prevented an attempted terrorist attack in a border area of the country, almost a month before the presidential election. The Amir al-Mumain Brigade seized a large quantity of weapons in a pocket of Ilam bordering Iraq. According to a statement issued by Brigade, the terrorists had moved the weapons to the area with the purpose of preparing for terrorist attacks in Iran ahead of the presidential elections scheduled for June 18th. The success of the mission was the result of a sophisticated intelligence operation performed by the brigade that made possible the arrest of 3 suspects. In Chad, the transitional government has called for the Front of Change and Concord rebel groups to surrender its weapons. The request was issued by Chad's Minister of National Reconciliation and Dialogue. The official said that this gesture will pave the way for talks to resolve the crisis in the country. He also said that a mission of the African Union had committed itself to transmit a message to the rebels and claimed that the group is supported by foreign countries. The latest crisis in Chad erupted after the death of President Idriss Déby Itno, caused by wounds he received on the battlefront against the rebels. The president's death led to the dissolution of the government and parliament and the installation of a military junta. On Thursday, Hungary began vaccinating people aged between 16 and 18 as it speeds up its vaccination efforts. The country has recorded one of the highest COVID-19 death rates per capita in the world. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. teleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on teleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Palestinian resistant missiles have reportedly reached the Nevatim Israeli Air Force Base, according to Hamas armored wing, the Qassam Brigades. Israeli media confirmed the attacks. The air base is located in the Negev desert in the northern part of occupied Palestine. The military wing of Hamas said it has begun using a new rocket that enables it to hit any point in Israel. Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif called for international airline companies to immediately cease their flights to any airport in Israeli-occupied Palestine, a spokesperson said. According to Lebanese agency Al Mayadeen, the occupation is using internationally banned weapons against Palestinians amid pleas for the International Criminal Court to investigate the matter. The number of dead Palestinians recorded since the beginning of the latest Israeli airstrikes on Gaza Strip has increased to 119, including 31 children and 15 women, while the number of injuries is around 830 and the figures continue to rise. Local media have reported that Israeli ships, artillery and aviation are now simultaneously shelling the eastern and western regions of the northern Gaza Strip, in addition to cutting off electricity supplies in large areas of the north of the Strip. Palestinian families living in Gaza's Seyjar neighborhood have been forced to leave after Israeli forces shelled the area. Israel has pounded Gaza for 4 days now and deployed extra troops to the border as the Palestinian resistance movement mobilizes to defend the Strip. As the violence escalated, Israel's security forces scrambled to contain deadly riots as Jewish extremists attack Arab Palestinians in Israel. Balls of flames rose high into the sky after strikes smashed into densely packed Gaza on Thursday night, and Palestinian families rushed to find safety.
Of shelling, and the children are all afraid. Even us, adults, have been in war since our childhood. We're afraid and cannot bear it anymore.
The situation is difficult for us in Chehaya. Everyone is fleeing. There are shells falling on the houses. My relatives called me and told everyone to evacuate Chehaya. We are now leaving.
And Palestinian families have taken shelter in a UN school in Gaza City after fleeing from their homes in the town of Beit Lahia. Sources said people were evacuating their homes in the northeastern part of the besieged Gaza Strip ahead of further Israeli attacks. Meanwhile, the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas has warned of a heavy response to a possible ground incursion by Israeli forces. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas vowed to continue to do everything possible to defend the Palestinian people and to stop the aggressive Israeli occupation during an emergency meeting with the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Central Committee of OTA.
I address my speech especially to the US and Israel. Enough is enough. Leave us. Release our hearts. We will remain a thorn in your eyes. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our country. We have acted on all levels in compliance with our national responsibilities, and we will continue to do everything possible to defend our people and stop this aggressive occupation from our country and our sanctities, and today we will study all our options that guarantee this. The occupying state wants to impose a colonial fait accompli in the city of Jerusalem and in all of our homeland, and for this, Israel is waging a frenzied war crimes and ethnic cleansing targeting the Palestinian presence and the Arab and Islamic identity in our capital, Jerusalem.
The Senegalese President Macky Sall called for the de-escalation of Israeli attacks against the Palestinians in a televised address broadcast on the occasion of the celebration of the Eid al-Fitr holiday celebrated by Muslims worldwide, which marks the end of the month-long fasting of Ramadan.
This is a time to pray for peace in the world, peace in Palestine and Israel, and we take this opportunity to call for de-escalation so that peace may return and healthy and serene discussions may be initiated between these two communities in accordance with international law.
And we have come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For teleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.